Hey guys, it's Mountain Walk, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about Magic the Gathering. A very brief history of Magic up until the present day, and yeah, lots of crazy stuff going on. We're going to be really focusing on the big trends, right? The big trends of what's going on. Trying to get some of the particulars, of course, but I mean, we're going to be covering sort of everything. Obviously, focusing on like card design and tournament play and things like that, but try and touch on other stuff here and there, stories and all sorts of other issues or things of note. So yeah, it should be interesting. It's something I've been working on for quite some time. I'm not even completely satisfied with it, of course, because well, it's like there's so much to talk about, but it's like I can't make like a 6-hour video, and that would it would just strain me to even like try and make something that large, and no one's really gonna watch it. And some of my longer videos are just it's just a YouTube thing in general, right? Longer videos, people just don't watch anything longer than 10 minutes. um I like doing longer videos, but yeah, I mean, if it goes on for like too long, I mean, anyone is probably not going to be able to pay attention or doesn't care or whatever, depends. But I do like to do long form videos. Obviously, I still do them occasionally, but yeah, this will be one of them, right? So settle down, relax. We'll get started right from the beginning. Get yourself a nice drink, something to drink, something delicious, maybe coffee, maybe beer, who knows? And let's go ahead and talk about Magic, and we'll start right at the beginning. So let's work our way forward chronologically. All right, in the beginning, there was Richard Garfield, a really smart math guy, and he wanted to make a game, and then he did, and it was called Magic the Gathering, and this came out in 1993 with Alpha, and big hit, really big hit. A lot of the first few sets, up until about 1995-ish, were very popular, very popular. Couldn't keep them on the shelves, and this is like really the first sort of trading card game, kind of collectible card game thing, right? So it was a game, but it was also like a collector thing. And so, I mean, right off the bat, bam, like huge hit. He was I mean, what Richard Garfield imagined, how we would play Magic, is completely not what the game turned into very quickly, So again, you can see this with some of the designs of cards in, say, Alpha, Beta, Unlimited, right? The first set is that stuff like Moxen and Lotus and stuff is just I mean, it's not like they didn't know that these weren't good cards, but it was like whatever. You'll have one Mox or something in your deck. Someone, maybe one of your friends has like a Black Lotus or something, but no one has all these cards, right? And to put them all into a deck and stuff, I mean, just doesn't happen. Or at least so he thought, right? Uh, yeah. So very cool. In the beginning, there was Richard Garfield, and it was pretty based. All right, and so there's really no rules or anything. Um, there's no formats basically for a while. Basically, kitchen table magic is all it was. Yeah, and like I said, obviously the power level is totally nuts. Like, I mean, probably the most broken deck of all time is just a deck where you're like, well, how about I just play? I don't remember the exact numbers, but I think it's like something like 40 Black Lotus and 30 Wheel of Fortune, approximately that much, right? It's the most compact combo you can get, and kills on turn one like 99.99% of the time, or something ridiculous, 98, 99% of the time. I mean, really silly stuff, because obviously if you play 70 cards and your opponent's just playing like 40, which it originally was, or 60 later on, and of course there was no 4 of rule in the beginning also, you just cast your Black Lotus and cast your Wheel of Fortune and wheel into more, Wheel of Fortunes and Black Lotus, and off you go, right? Very simple. I mean, literally just 2 cards, just double digits of Lotus and Wheel of Fortune, and yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure there's nothing more broken than that. Like, I mean, not even close, right? I mean, this is barely like, it's not even solitaire, because in solitaire at least you have like different different suits, and you can not win at solitaire, right? Like so even more simplified than that. Anyways, very silly decks, very silly decks. So yeah, everything just totally weird. 1994, January 25th, it was when we get the first banned and restricted list. And of course, this has very powerful cards on it, like Ali from Cairo and Dingus Egg and Icy Manipulator. At least Icy Manipulator is a good card and saw play and for quite some time afterwards. But mm, yeah, didn't yeah. Yeah, these were eventually taken off fairly quickly. We still have really weird restrictions or bannings or whatever with Curd Ape and Juggernaut, I believe, and Hypnotic Specter as well. I think were all banned and extended. It was weird because Standard and Vintage, um, also known as Type 1, which is Vintage, and then Type 2 was Standard. These like had like the same sort of ban list, but like also had a strict. I mean, it's very confusing. Don't worry about it too much. But yeah, the early sort of ban and restrictions and stuff, they're sort of still trying to figure stuff out. And it's not really up until like the early 2000s, I think, before they really sort of like figure stuff out for the most part. But I like to call this the sort of wild magic era. You know, like wild magic in sort of fantasy things is like this trope where magic itself is uncontrollable. You can't really direct it very well, if at all. It's very powerful, sort of like how, you know, some sort of like the mana on Zendikar, something like that. That's sort of how I like to think of this era. Everything's crazy, card design's crazy, all sorts of weird, wonky stuff going on. So pretty silly. All right. So four sets really are in this era. Arabian Nights, Antiquities, Legends, the Dark, and of course there's Fallen Empires too. I think that comes at the sometime in '94. Shoot, I'd have to remember, or I can't. I'd have to check. I forgot. My bad. My bad. Um, but yeah, there and these were very groundbreaking sets because they sort of lay the well the groundwork, the foundation, so to speak, for upcoming sets. So in Antiquities, of course, is artifact centric, tons and tons of artifacts, artifact creatures, things like that. Legends had multicolor cards, extremely powerful. Not in Legends, that's for sure. Extremely popular, even though most of the cards were not particularly great. And of course, this would influence later sets, as well as Tribal. Again, another very popular thing. I mean, all of these artifacts, multicolor, and Tribal are all very popular themes and mechanics in the game. And so it's kind of interesting how they're, you know, right at the beginning of the game, you have this kind of stuff. Obviously, just the balance on a lot of this stuff isn't particularly good. So look at like Colossus of Sardia or something, but then also look at something like Mishra's Workshop and Mana Vault and Soul Ring and some of these other early artifacts and, you know, Suchi and Juggernaut. These are probably actually okay balanced, but it's, yeah, we haven't really figured out exactly how, like, there's just not a lot of theory, and that takes a couple years longer, really up until like 95, I think, 96, when we start getting stuff with like card advantage theory and like the deck and as well as ideas about aggro decks, and then of course a little later on, Alan Comer, like in 97, 98 or something, I think, we have the Xerox strategy, so the idea of tempo, you know, so that takes a little bit longer. But anyways, so Fallen Empires in particular had a lot of really stuff. So had tribal stuff, had counters and tokens and really fun stuff like that. You know, stuff with Saprolings, fungus stuff, which is very cool, very fun, which they brought back in a recent set, and Dominaria, of course. And actually, even though Fallen Empires gets a bad rap for being like underpowered, it actually has just some pretty ridiculous cards, like the Pump Knights, which were just good. The Pump Knights, the 2-mana 2/1 guys that had like pro color, you could pump front side and then also give them first strike. So there was the white and black ones of those. Those were very powerful. And they're okay today, right? But if they were printed, I don't know if they'd be played typically because power creep's pretty insane these days. But again, those were actual good creatures, efficiently constant creatures in 1994. I mean, it's pretty crazy. Then, of course, we have Hymn to Turok, one of my least favorite cards, and also most favorite cards. It's fun when I'm casting them, of course, but it's I think it should be acknowledged that this is one of the, not only is it one of the cheapest sources of card advantage in the game, but it's also one of the most brutal, and it's because, especially because it's random. Like you could just mana screw people, and combined with any other kind of disruption, wasteland, or I mean sinkhole, strip mine. I mean any of these kinds of things, duress. It just, you can shred someone's hand. I mean, and it creates the most non-games. It's still to this day, this card is just not fun. This is why one of the reasons I actually like Veil of Summer, because I'm tired of getting fucking hymned. Like, I've been losing to this card for the entire time I've been playing Magic. Like, don't, it's just, anyways, I'm not going to go off on Hymn to Turok, but I love it and then also loathe it. So, High Tide, of course, again, another absurd, out of flavor card. Well, I mean, the flavor is actually pretty good. High Tide, you know, water goes up, there's more water, so you get more mana, right? But obviously this isn't really in Blue's color pie. Uh, what? It's an absurd card. It created the super unfun deck. Yeah, if you ever played against High Tide before, I mean, it's just like, oh boy, especially the reset Tide was just absurd. And of course, Goblin Grenade, again, just a good, powerful card, but especially back in the day where you're sacrificing these random shitty guys to, you know, deal someone 5 damage for 1 mana. Totally powerful. So Fallen Empires, I think, gets a bit of a bad rap. There are a lot of bad cards, of course, but that's, the power level's all over the place in these early sets since they haven't figured them out. But to say it has no good cards in it, or even broken cards, I mean, that's just patently untrue. Anyways, but yeah, Fallen Empires was basically the first set really to get overprinted. I mean, overprinted a lot too, and they overcompensated. So they couldn't keep the stuff on the shelves, so Wizards just printed a shitload and a shitload of Fallen Empires. I mean, there's still like tons of unopened boxes and stuff. The cards are basically worth nothing. So yeah, kind of crazy, kind of interesting. So that's why, you know, the what Rudy likes to call the Four Horsemen with Arabian Nights, Antiquities, Legends, and the Dark. Fallen Empires isn't included in that for obvious reasons. So yeah. All right, and then we get to 1995, and then Magic starts taking shape to what we could recognize today as, well, Magic, or at least the way it's organized and card designs and things like that. Maybe even art-wise too. And so, of course, this is named after, you know, I named this era after the format, right? Pre-modern 1995 to 2003, all old bordered stuff, but basically recognizable as Magic for the most part. There's still wonky stuff going on, but it's something that we could recognize today. And so this is also first block, basically, so Ice Age Alliances and then Homelands, which originally gets, or eventually gets replaced by Cold Snap much later on. We got some funny stuff. It was Inquest, right, that rated Necropotence with, like, I think it was like 1 star, so, which is basically like in their rating system that's like completely unplayable. It's kind of, again, kind of funny, a little funny. Necropotence probably, again, top 10 most powerful cards in the game, of course, depending on how you organize things like Moxes and stuff, but there's some weird mechanics that don't really work out very well, but maybe not bad. Maybe just the implementation isn't very good. So, for example, cumulative upkeep, not that good. It would be tough to make it work. They did bring it back in Cold Snap, and I think it worked a little bit better there, but it's still a pretty awkward mechanic. Slow trips, so they're cantrips, but it's just next upkeep. So those are more balanced than cantrips in a way, but they're also, you have a bunch of memory issues, which makes them not really worth it. Although something like Portent is obviously very powerful in Miracles, because being able to draw a card on their turn, which will trigger the Terminus, of course, that's actually pretty good. And of course, Snow. Snow is a good mechanic. Good-ish mechanic, depending on how they make the cards and balance them. But in Kaldheim, all the snow stuff is pretty reasonable, I'd say. So yeah, so that was just more of an implementation problem. Obviously, some of the snow cards in Modern Horizons were a little bit pushed, to say the least. But lots of reprints and tweaks on cards, which is very cool. So of course we get Swords to Plowshares back, but we get tweaks on cards. For example, like Brainstorm, very just a tweaked version of Ancestral Recall, and of course Incinerate, which is a tweaked version of Lightning Bolt, of course, with the upside of killing regenerators. That's quite good. Yeah, so definitely a lot of really cool, interesting stuff going on here. I really like it a lot. I mean, you got a Bissell Specter, which is not a great card per se, but it is a slightly, well, it's a tweaked Hypnotic Specter. Hippie was a lot better back in the day, but not so much anymore. So a Bissell Specter looks quite bad. But also, biggest thing, this is the first dual land cycle we get, really. I mean, there's other cycles of non-basic lands that sometimes produce additional mana. In fact, there's actually 2 in Ice Age, but the other ones, the depletion lands, aren't very good. But the pain lands, this is very, very good. The balanced sort of dual lands, unlike the original ABU duels, which had no drawback and no reason not to run billions of colors. The actual dual land or pain lands from Ice Age work very good. And of course, January 10th of 1985, Type 1 and Type 2 introduced, and then 1.5, which eventually ends up becoming Legacy, and back in the day shared like a ban list with Vintage, but what ends up happening is all the restricted cards in Vintage were banned in 1.5, so kind of wonky, kind of weird. Again, they keep changing this stuff back in the day. Just don't worry about it too much. But yeah, so there you go. All right. And so yeah, here I know I'm sorry the I couldn't find a better scan, but yeah, this is there's a Necropotence, as you can see, with the 1 dot, meaning that's the lowest rating they gave a card for Inquest. Obviously, yeah, Necro, terrible. I mean, because like back in the day, like dude, if you don't have any life, like if you have less life, that's really bad. Like you could die, dude. But doesn't matter if it's 1 life or 20 life. Winning's winning, right? Right? That's what I thought. Okay, so a really awesome and very powerful mechanic they introduced in Alliances that has been brought back quite a few times. Most recently, off the top of my head, is Modern Horizons, is the free spells. So we got, and all of these ones are good, mostly. So Force of Will, of course, absolutely important, format defining. Bounty of the Hunt, which saw play in Stompy decks for a while. The 10-land Stompy decks, of course, not that great today. Pyrokinesis, actually very, very good. It's quite good in Goblins, which still plays it. I mean, because this is like translating cards in your hand to board advantage. I mean, sometimes even like a 4 for 2 or 4 for 1. Sometimes it's very good. And of course, Contagion, again, a kill spell. A little bit of a drawback because you have to pay a life, unlike the other ones, which some of the other ones didn't have the life drawback, like Pyrokinesis. Contagion is very good, very powerful in the Necro decks, of course, because you have tons of cards and not always like enough mana to play them all, and especially at instant speed, being able to pitch your newly drawn cards from Necro to Contagion, quite good, quite good. And then of course there was a white one which was garbage. I think it was called Scars of the Veteran. I think it was like some weird damage. It was just bad. White definitely got the short end of the stick on some of these cycles. Probably my favorite card from Alliances, of course, is Mox Monkey, aka Gorilla Shaman. It was actually really good back in the day in Vintage, of course, because it was like a 1 colorless to Stone Rain something, because you can destroy Moxen and Lotus and Mana Bolts and Soul Rings and stuff for a little bit more. That was pretty cool. I remember when that guy was played a long time ago. And there's also really funny stuff with the art. Like Mystic Remora looks like a creature, but it's like actually just an enchantment, which is really strange, and it's like hard to tell exactly what's going on with the art. And then there was this weird mix-up with Hialopterys Lemur, which is a lemur is like a ghost or something, I think, but like this guy thought it was a lemur, like the animal, the cute animal, so they They printed, they had an art of a lemur on it. It's pretty funny. Silly stuff back in the day. Stuff wasn't quite that good. All right, Homelands. Basically the worst set of all time. Probably the only playable card is Merchant Scroll. Pretty sure. Of course, Merchant Scroll just gets, I mean, just is a pretty silly card once you can start getting like Ancestral Recall and Gush and Brainstorm and all these other ridiculous blue cards. Of course, a lot of times you even got just like Force of Will. Sometimes you end up getting stuff like Frantic Search and other things like that. But Merchant Scroll, pretty insane in older formats, just because the power of blue instance is just like through the roof, right? I mean, just getting Ancestral Recall itself is basically worth it. Pretty much none of the cards are good. This is probably the worst set of all time by far, although you can give them a little bit of a break just because, like, this is, I mean, they just didn't know how to design this. I think they had like non-Magic people design a lot of these cards on the in Homelands. It had like an interesting story with like Olgrotha and stuff and some other things and Baron Sengir, and that's kind of neat. But yeah, most of the cards are almost all just garbage. So yeah, but Merchant Scroll's good, so there's that. All right, Mirage Block, baby. Here we go. Now we got like a real block. So we got three real sets that are actually like connected, like storyline wise. And we have the beginning, of course, of the Weatherlight storyline in Weatherlight, third set in the block. We get Charms. First time the Charms are introduced. Very, maybe not super powerful in Mirage, but Emerald Charm was played, of course, in sideboards, as well as something like Funeral Charm that was sometimes played. In Visions, we get Enter the Battlefield effects. These are, for better or worse, these are very powerful, pretty good, pretty useful back in the day. I mean, there's like Uktobia Orangutan was quite good, Necrotal, things like that. Man of War, of course, a very famous one. These are all great cards, but they're balanced, right? Like, you know, obviously, ETB stuff can be too much free value if they don't price the cards correctly, which is, you know, obviously a problem these days. But in general, this was really cool because you have creatures kind of acting like spells and giving them some extra value, but the buys are a little worse. So it was pretty interesting. And then they really started pushing weenie decks, like in green and red and black and stuff in these formats. Just like really like 1 mana, 2 power guys, sometimes usually with like drawbacks and stuff like that. Different flavors. Sometimes you lose life, take damage. Sometimes it's tapped and all sorts of things. But that's a big thing. Really, for next couple blocks, we see a lot of really powerful weenies. Of course, we have the absurd, the tutor cycle, the top deck tutor one. So the Empiric, Mystical, Enlightened, Worldly, and there was no red one. Red did get Recruiter, which is like 1,000, or I guess I should say it's like 30 Worldly tutors, but this was actually not good back in the day. It was, again, just a joke card. All these Goblin tribal cards were all joke cards until they suddenly weren't. And then, of course, again, LED being a bad card, right? Which I thought was pretty funny. Yeah, and so what LED was not very good back in the day. Well, it kind of was, depending on the rulings and stuff and how you could use it. This was obviously absurd in the jar decks in Saga Block, but it took a little time to break it, and most people weren't really like playing with like a lot of old vintage stuff, so it's like for the most part didn't really find a use. Although number 3 on here where it says with balance, that was actually used by the Storm decks in 2003 that just came out in vintage. Oftentimes they Burning Wish for a balance, sack their hand, and then just like nuke the other deck, just completely, you know. And you can do that like on turn 1 pretty easily. So yeah, pretty great stuff here. But yeah, just funny seeing how, you know, again, context dependent, like how do you use these cards is dependent on how good they are, which is what they're surrounded by. So that's always something to remember. All right. Um, yeah, so yeah, Flash is introduced, but it gets a power level around, I think it's around 6th edition, so it doesn't work the way it works now, because they removed it like about a decade later in 2007 or so. There's a lot of, again, some weird wonky mechanics, like phasing, cube of upkeep, more world enchantments. And this is the last set was Weatherlight that had world enchantments, I believe. Um, yeah, world enchantments didn't really work out very well. Um, of course, already mentioned the Weatherlight Saga. I think Imperial Armor might be the first good aura printed. I'm not actually sure, the first good enchant creature kind of thing. This was obviously played in like the land text style, like White Weenie decks, because you get all these extra lands, and you can put your Imperial Armor on your Savannah Lions and just go to town. And then this is probably the first time you really see like a sort of modern kind of like combo where you have like part A and part B and stuff. So like the um, oh shoot, what's the word I'm looking for? Well, the A plus B combos, but yeah, so we see that, and that like that's okay, you know. I wish I could, yeah, just produce jillions of mana and cast Prosperity or Drain Life, and I'm trying to think what was the shoot. I can't even remember the name of the card. Well, let's just go on. This is too embarrassing. I can't believe I don't remember it. It was the Pros Bloom deck, the Cadaverous Bloom one. Oh well. Anyways, that's okay. We're good. Okay, Tempest Block. Now here is really where we start seeing modern design. Like, for example, all of the mechanics. There's no real bad mechanics, so to speak. They don't. There's nothing weird. They're like modern design mechanics for the most part. They're all pretty good. There's some obviously, I should say, good power level, but there are obviously some problematic ones, of course. Um, yeah, and there's the art actually is not only is the art becoming sort of better or just higher resolution, but we're seeing less wonky stuff. I believe this is the last set, more or less the last set with Foglio art. They had the cartoony sort of art. So like if you look at the Ice Age art for Sulphur Springs, of course that's a Foglio art. Spirit Link, I believe, also had Kaja Foglio art. So yeah, those are just not in line with Magic's current art style, I guess, in 1997-ish. So that's okay, no biggie. But again, we have slivers. This is the really first super popular tribe, probably because it's so powerful, right? It's like you got your crystalline sliver, which makes your dudes like have shroud. You have muscle sliver, which pumps them. You have the wing sliver, which gives them all flying, and like this is great. So this was actually a really good deck and extended because you had all the dual lands, and you could play like hibernation sliver too, and your dudes would be immune to spot removal, mass removal. You just fly over blockers. You'd be very fast. You could play all sorts of stuff in 4 colors. You know, like demonic consultation, swords, brainstorm, stuff like that. Very good deck. Very sweet. It was a super fun deck. These are the first gold cards since Legends, and I think it was just the slivers that actually had gold cards off the top of my head. And yeah, like I said, no bad mechanics, but the listed stuff was really confusing, especially rules-wise. Also not very good. And Exodus, of course, is the first set that has the rarity on the set symbol. So like its gold is rare, and the white is uncommon, and the black is just common. So, all right. Now we have Tempest Block. And yeah, again, really, well, I should say I have Tempest Block again. So now we have really pushed aggro stuff. So again, from Mirage Block, and we still have this continuation of just pushing the crap out of weenie creatures. So like the red decks get, you know, like Jackal-Pup, Mog Fanatic, Mog Flunky's Curse Scroll, and these were all just in Tempest proper. So a lot of really powerful cards for aggressive decks. Very powerful. And of course, like black and green, of course, get good stuff too, as well as white actually gets like a lot of the shadow stuff. A lot of the shadow cards are very powerful as well, because I mean they just sort of Well, mostly white and black are the only ones that were good, but obviously a creature with shadow can't be blocked except by other creatures with shadow. So it's just like you're just sort of racing, and it's not very interactive, but it's very powerful, very good. Buyback is probably the first mechanic that's like explicitly kind of broken. It's mostly just like stuff like, again, capsize with is pretty brutal to play against, as well as stuff like constant mists. There's stuff like corpse dance, which is okay, but not super broken. Yeah, because they can obviously buyback create super repetitive gameplay loops. And then of course we have the slow trips turn into cantrips, which is much nicer. No memory issues. Obviously it makes them quite a bit more powerful as well. Alright, so again, more creature power creep. As you can see, our good friend Sultari Priest on the left. A good example of a powerful shadow card. And then of course our good friend Rathy Dragon on the right. Rathy Dragon seems pretty humble by today's standards, but it's a powerful card. Back in the day, I saw this thing, I was like, wow, 4 mana 5/5, all I have to do is sack 2 mountains? That's great. Like, that's definitely a good top end for a lot of those red decks at the time, and you could just fly over a bunch of stuff, and it was a big beefy guy, which red typically didn't get, not for this cheap at least. So yeah, it was very fast, very uninteractive in a lot of respects. And of course, there's tons and tons and tons of enablers in this set. Things like Lurin, Survival of the Fittest, stuff like Ancient Tomb, City of Traders, Mox Diamond is in this set, Lotus Petal. I mean, just all over the place. Just tons of crazy build around me cards. Yeah, that's not going to go very well for them. It's not going to go very well for them very fast. Oops, we printed Saga Block. Oops, we broke every single format in the game, and everyone's just like casting Stroke of Geniuses on themselves and then again on their opponents for 1 million. Yeah, this is just completely ridiculous. Yeah, obviously, again, probably won't spend too much time talking about the combo decks too much because we did talk a little bit about that in my Urza's Saga video, specifically about Urza's Block, but this is sort of the birth of modern combo decks. More I guess you want to say advanced, maybe. Almost like, I mean, sometimes you have like a particular engine like Mind Over Matter, or Memory Jar, but I would say this is like the birth of modern combo decks, especially like our idea of like combo decks being extremely fast, right? Because the other ones were typically older and slower, and Frost Bloom couldn't really kill you that fast and needed all these cards, and it's pretty easy to disrupt, where like the Tolarian Academy decks were just like, okay, turn 1 or 2, I'll kill you. So yeah, very, very different time. Again, we still get a lot more aggro weenie stuff. This is still a trend that's continuing. Stuff like Pouncing Jaguar. So Echo, of course, another mechanic. We get the first foil cards in Urza's Legacy. So that's kind of interesting. And this is also the end of the reserve list, too, that they instituted like 95, 96 after Chronicles. So it was around 1999, I think? Yeah, because Mercadian Masque is the first set that didn't have no reserve list cards. So, and there's a ton of fun casual cards. Back in the day, stuff like Sarah Avatar was actually really fun and sought after. Not so much anymore, of course, but people did love it because it could be like a 2020 or bigger. Think about that. It's only 7 mana, triple white, totally. It even has, it's funny because it has the anti reanimation stuff on it, right? Because obviously Reanimate was introduced in Tempest Block, and then of course Exhume in this block, and as well as Victimize and stuff, so it's always kind of fun. Again, cycling is a mechanic that's introduced, and is of course one of the greatest mechanics ever. You know, you could just slap cycling on anything and it's great, you know. Definitely one of my favorite mechanics, definitely a great mechanic just for the game in general. You know, reducing the amount of dead cards you have in your hand makes your deck more alive all the time, and that's definitely a good thing to have. Definitely a good thing to have. And this is, of course, from the Destroy All Humans They Can't Be Regenerated manga. And this guy just, he just comes up with the jar combo deck, of course, which is totally absurd. And I think it's like an issue or two later has him like spurging out. Because the deck's just so stupid, right? He's like, oh, turn one Necro, draw a million cards, and then kill them on turn two or turn one, depending if you just go like writ in the jar and just, oh my gosh, it is just anything. Yeah, it's pretty funny. So, good stuff. It's a good manga. You guys should go read it. It's really sweet. All right, so we're jumping straight to our good friend Masque Block, and this is a big power down in a lot of ways, of course, than Saga. You know, no real broken mana acceleration and stuff, and a lot of the really good cards, things like Rishadan Port and the Rebels mechanics and stuff, and Rhystic cards. Okay, well the Rhystic cards weren't good. Some of the Spell Shapers were good. But it was all about slowing down the game, slow it down. Of course, it doesn't help that, you know, stuff like Rishadan Port and Tanglewire are completely unfun cards to play against. But I love them. I love them all the same. So yeah, definitely anything to slow the game down. Anything to slow the game down. Yeah, because it didn't really work out too well with all this broken artifact nonsense. And it was underpowered in some ways, but in other ways, not really. It actually has a ton of cards that are just stupid, like stuff like Daze and Gush. A lot of the free spells just in general are just going to be very powerful, and we of course see those come back. Yeah, definitely interesting stuff going on here. Again, won't talk about too much. Already made a video on this, so you can always go and watch that. But yeah, this is kind of a trend where they do like the artifact block, and then oops, it breaks everything. Then they do a weak block after it, and then after the weak block, they do a multicolor block because we need to make the game not suck and people leave. Rebels was actually a really cool mechanic. Obviously, was a little too good, but it's a very interesting mechanic. It would be nice if they brought it back. I don't think. I mean, it's a little powerful. I don't know. They might have to tweak some of the stuff, like Lin Civi creating these like loops where like you can never run out of creatures. Might be a bit too much for things like Standard, but it might be an interesting mechanic for like Modern Horizons. I think that'd be pretty sweet. All right, so what we need to do is make the game not suck. And to do that, what we do, hire a bunch of pro players like Randy Bueller and Aaron Forsyth and stuff. And that's what they did. And thankfully, they hit it out of the park with Invasion. This is around the time I started, and this is like I think is one of the best, most open, free-form, well-designed sort of blocks. You're not really like, you don't have to play any particular color combination. You know, you're not forced to play with certain mechanics or whatever. Like, you can play with kicker cards if they're good or not or whatever. It's not a big deal. Of course, kicker, again, a good mechanic introduced in this set, which has seen tons and tons of play and reprints all throughout its history when it gets reused. So that's cool. Lots of really good cantrip cards. Again, as you see here, exclude. Repulse, stuff like that. Tons of like just really powerful, good spells that have a lot of value. Probably would never see today. Stuff like Recoil Probe, Dismantling Blow, things like that. Lots of value, lots of cantripping. I mean, there's insane amounts of cantrips on basically every card. Yeah, gold cards, again, tons and tons of those, and a lot of them are very good, well costed. Split cards, you know, things like Assault Battery, Fire Ice, things like that. Very good. Wax Wayne. In my opinion, I think is one of the best sets ever, just because a lot of the things that I like, I think, are present in Invasion Block, just throughout all of the sets. And I think here's really where we see a lot of like the creature power creep. I mean, creatures have been somewhat getting better overall, but this is like really when we start seeing stuff like, okay, that's actually pretty good. Stuff like Flametongue Kavu or Meddling Mage. Again, these are quite good cards, or even some of the gold cards. Stuff like Spirit Monger and Lightning Angel, quite good. Mystic Snake, of course. Lots of good stuff. Again, some of these haven't aged as well, but some of them have. Some of them have. Obviously, Meddling Mage still quite good. Very quite good. It's pretty good. So yeah, I would say this is about really when we start really getting a lot of good, powerful creatures. You get some stuff like Blastoderm and Nemesis and things like that, and like again, you have some of the weenies and stuff in older sets. But more or less, by and large, I think really some of the good sort of standalone creatures, maybe even I guess you could call them mid-range sort of creatures. This is really, I think, when we start getting a lot of them. So good cards without downsides, I guess would be a good way to put it too. So this is good though, because obviously creatures were pretty bad for a long time. Yeah, again, we see the Artifact Block, Weak Block, Multicolor Block, quite good here. All right, Flame Tongue Kavu. This thing was great, and it was really funny because in 7th edition, which came out around or before Planeshift, I can't remember, they had like a Sarah Angel back in the core set. Oh boy, this is going to be great. Everyone's going to want to play with their Sarah Angel. And then they print FTK, and it's like, oh, things with 4 toughness aren't actually good because they just get FTK'd. And so you lose board presence, and you typically spend a bunch of mana for it, and it's just not very good. So that was really funny. It was pretty amusing. We get a lot of enemy-colored stuff in Apocalypse. So Pernicious Deed, a big one. Vindicate, of course I mentioned Spirit Monger, Gerard's Verdict. Oh shoot, there's like Goblin Legionnaire is actually pretty good. 2 mana, 2/2 with decent abilities. Yeah, a lot of good enemy-colored stuff. Because that was seen as like a downside. And of course the enemy-colored Painlands. So that cycle was completed in Apocalypse, so that was very good. Everything really tied together, because in Apocalypse, all of the everyone was working together to defeat the Weatherlight, to defeat Yawgmoth, and the Weatherlight becomes like the Legacy, and pretty crazy. But yeah, this is like a really good set because all the mechanics and everything else sort of worked together towards this sort of thematic story driven thing. So that's cool. Power level was actually pretty high. Well, I wouldn't say pretty high. At the time, it was a lot higher than it felt like than something like Masque Block. But it felt like right. What the everything was pretty flat, but it wasn't low. So everything was about the same power level. And yeah, this is the first time I think off the top of my head where we have cards to host particular other cards. So for example, Sabo's Web, which was against like stuff like Rashid Import. Anyone can play it. And then Sabo's Decree, of course, against Rebels. Because Rebels was probably the first really pushed tribe. Well, Slivers was pretty good too, but this is the first one that really messed up Standard. So yeah, Sabo's Decree was a pretty brutal, like, kill all your dudes, reveal your hand, discard all those cards. Pretty brutal card, but I like Sabo's Decree. That's sweet. All right, really pretty much everything was good in this block. Block constructed itself, I think, might have been just like Domain just being the best deck. I'm not actually sure, but Domain was maybe not the best thing to play against, although I really liked it. I mean, just like looping 2 legacy weapons so you never draw out, and just exiling every permanent they have. I mean, I think that's funny, but maybe not the best gameplay. The only thing that's really broken, more or less, in the format, of course, was Fact or Fiction. Really powerful, obviously. I mean, obviously, all the pile of cantrip removal spells and stuff like Exclude and Repulse are pretty brutal to play against too, just for like a tempo or even card advantage lens, just because, well, they've replaced themselves. So most of the time, your cheap counter spells don't replace themselves, or even Absorb or Undermine gives you a bonus for just 3 mana. So yeah, maybe that's too much a bit, but it was, I think everything more or less worked out. Yeah, this is. I would say Foff is probably the last like super busted draw spell. Like in Ravnica, Return to Ravnica, you have Sphinx's Revelation, but like that's a billion mana, and X spells just aren't really scary, especially at that point in time. Like it's just whatever. So I'd say Foff is probably the last really really good one. Deep Analysis and Odyssey Block is pretty good, but it's not broken or anything. Obviously, just being instant speed with Fact or Fiction was so good, and just the older the format, it just got better and better because, like in something like Vintage, all your colorless mana can be paid with by all your random off-color moxes and stuff. So like you just dump your hand. If they don't play anything, just Foff, refill, and then you have all these additional spells and tons of mana, and it's just pretty silly. Oh yeah, had Dragon Legends, which were great. The Dragon Legends, so Crosis and Daragaz and Rith and so on. Those were really fun. They even saw some tournament play. These were, of course, were really well costed. 6 mana, 6/6s of the 3 different colors of the shards. So that was cool. Nice throwback to the original Legends, Elder Dragons. And, of course, probably another really cool thing was the Fires decks that came out in this time. Um, this is probably like the first deck that I can think of that was really just super devoted to just like spamming fatties. Just like huge fat creatures, you know. So you got your Blastoderms and Flametone Kavus and Shivan Worms and all sorts of other stuff. And of course, fires to give them haste, and 4 birds, 4 elves, and you just start slamming tons of dudes and just make them. It was really scary because every time they top decked a card, it could just be some huge fatty, which again has haste and like all of your sorcery speed removal. So like stuff like Wrath of God, of course, just wouldn't be very good, right? And so like if you know you could just get punished. So that was a sweet deck, but there was a lot of cool decks around this era. Probably another reason why I liked it a lot. Mm-hmm. All right. Now we got Odyssey, graveyard themed block. First set with a real good graveyard theme. And also probably the beginning of the trend as we see of graveyard being your second hand. It wasn't that bad, I'd say, in Odyssey, really. Because there wasn't a lot of stuff that like really gave you like super duper easy access to like cards. I mean, there was flashback, of course, but they weren't really. It wasn't stuff like Snapcaster Mage and things like that. Um, but yeah, so that's kind of a worrying trend because most of the decks that play those cards yeah, aren't really affected too much by um, Graveyard Hate, which is not fun. Again, this is a very spiky-ish block because typically discarding cards from your hand was not a good thing. So the play patterns were kind of wonky. But I mean, like I said, I started around this time and I really like Madness and all those cards and stuff. And it wasn't that confusing. Like, discard it and play it or whatever. I mean, I get a 3 mana 4/4. Like, who cares? Like, I get 4 mana 6/6 worm tokens. Um, so yeah, again, more creature power creep. This was perhaps best noted, of course, by Wild Mongrel, which again looks rather humble today. But the color changing was actually a lot better back in the day. You didn't have as many 3 mana burn spells, so it was much harder to kill. And being able to dodge color hoses and stuff like that is quite good. So yeah, obviously, and of course, being an outlet for madness and flashback stuff and whatever. Um, and then also, we don't have any more Dark Ritual. They took that out in Masque Block, so and it wasn't in like 7th edition. So they did print like Cabal Ritual, but obviously that's a million times worse. So they did really go hard in Torment with like Cabal Coffers and Mutilate and Antuco Shade and all these other stuff. And it was really sweet. It was a really powerful deck, and it's probably the first really good like mono black deck since they banned Necro. Like they didn't reprint it in 6th edition, obviously, because it was in 5th edition, caused problems in Saga Block. They're like, okay, we should just stop. This card is too good, obviously. The format was weird. I never played enough back in the day to really get the hang of it. It was kind of interesting though. Yeah, had some pretty insane bombs though, like Abotion, Cephaly guy. He was pretty nuts. All right, so I know I didn't even talk about Tog, But yeah, that was a really powerful card that sort of really played on like all the absurd like blue card drawing and stuff like repulse and exclude and all sorts of other things. But I've talked about so much. I'll just leave it be. Like I said, can't touch on everything. Onslaught Block. First biggest thing, fetches. These were only okay, like in standard at the time, but obviously their interaction with original dual lands is just absurd. People didn't quite know how good they would be with the dual lands, so they played like just still like a bunch of dual lands and only a few fetches. But eventually people ended up seeing that, yeah, these cards are actually really good against Wasteland, so you can just play more of these and fewer duels. And eventually, like, it was sort of figured out, you know, in Vintage at the time that like these were pretty good, and you know, people just ended up playing more as they figured out how good they were. So yeah, really completely changed the way mana bases work, because typically it was just like 4 of all of these, you know, of your, you know, your 3 color deck. Here's all my, you know, my 12 duels, and then you play like Painlands or basics or whatever eventually. And yeah, so this has totally changed the way we built our mana bases. And of course, it still affects us to this day. So that's, you know, 19 years later. It's a long time. Again, first real tribal deck. First real tribal format, of course. So that's pretty cool. And then we do end up shifting the color pie. So Naturalize is in green now. So it was Disenchant was a white card. Now it's in green. Of course, these days both Naturalize and Disenchant are in color pie for both white and green. But green gets Naturalized, which is great. Red gets a big overhaul, so now red has the fast mana dark ritual effects, and then also red has like the pinger stuff that blue had, so like the Prodigal Sorcerer. Now red gets Goblin Sharpshooter, which is a little better. So that's pretty cool. And of course, all sorts of different tribes. There's like beasts and wizards and birds, and of course slivers come back, which is quite good. And of course, goblins. This is when Goblins goes from like a joke tribe to, holy crap, this is actually a real deck. Pretty insane, pretty insane. It's like the only really competitive or good tribe to come out. I mean, there was a little bit of stuff in Block with like beasts, but I don't think that was that great for very long. And of course, in Scourge, we do have, again, one of the most infamous mechanics in Storm. Again, this is something that only really works very well in older formats when you have all the mana acceleration and stuff. But yeah, Mind's Desire was basically restricted after like a week or something. Pretty ridiculous. Yeah, pretty ridiculous. And so this really changed the way that most older Academy style decks played. You're all basically just Tendrils of Agony Storm decks, and you play your one Academy, but you don't really give a shit. Like, you don't need to tutor it up. If you draw it, that's great. If not, I mean, whatever. Doesn't matter. So yeah, pretty crazy. Definitely a very revolutionary block. The format was actually pretty good, pretty interesting. It had some cards that were a little silly. Sparksmith, Timberwatch Elf, or Battlefield Medic even are a little higher on the power level. Especially as commons for like these powerful, repeatable effects were a little silly. Morph is introduced, which is kind of interesting. Unfortunately, it didn't really play out very well just because there was only a handful of good morph creatures like Exalted Angel and Blistering Firecat. It was interesting and limited, I'd say. And of course, that actually plays out pretty well in cons. So, all right. So now we come to the modern era, basically. Obviously, there's, of course, the card face change. This is the biggest difference. But of course, the first set is 8th edition, which is just a core set, which is not that interesting. But the first actual expansion set is, of course, Mirrodin. And that causes a lot of problems in a lot of different formats for a lot of different reasons. Not, of course, just affinity, like it was like in Standard and Block and so on. Standard just kind of goes wonky. Doesn't really work. it's not. Mirrodin itself is bad, and they screw up. But after Mirrodin, things are good for a while, and good for a long while. There are some issues, of course, like this kind of sort of power creep and sort of like design, trying to fix the mistakes of the previous design, but they have to sort of power creep or push these certain things to fix the previous thing. So it's like this kind of escalation. So that doesn't really work. But we do have really good formats, like in Champions and Rhaptica and Time Spiral are very good blocks. Of course, we still have artifact blocks being broken for different reasons. And in fact, the bannings during Mirrodin Block are actually create more problems. The bannings actually are worse. For example, say like think about Darksteel and Skullclamp. With Skullclamp, there's a bunch of different viable decks that all do a bunch of different things. Without Skullclamp, there's a bunch of decks that don't really work. And so it's basically just affinity versus anti-affinity. So this is a case where bans actually make the format worse. And of course, we have Type 1 and Type 1.5 become Legacy and Vintage in 2004, right? So they actually get a name. All right, starting at Mirrodin Block, this is the second artifact-centric block, right? If we're counting Urza Saga as first and not really counting Antiquities. Although Antiquities is the artifact-centric block, I mean, whatever. And, oh, guess what? It is also completely broken, right? Oopsie daisy, we screwed it up. Affinity obviously was too nuts. Even modular was kind of problematic too, making removal not as good as it should be. So yeah, Block Standard and Extended didn't really work, and then in Vintage for Mirrodin Block, it was things like Chalice of the Void and Trinisphere and other things, causing these workshop decks to be completely ridiculous. Fifth Dawn had this 5-color thing, which I'm not really sure how that worked out. I mean, I guess if they thought that Mirrodin was just going to be like this colorless block where people are kind of playing colors, and then like, oh, you could do this 5-color thing, but also play artifacts. I don't know. It was very wonky. Not really sure how that works. But yeah, Standard kind of sucked. Standard kind of sucked with Mirrodin in. Not so good. All right, so let's go to Champions. Champions by itself was a pretty sweet block. There's a lot of really cool stuff, actually. Contrary to popular belief, I mean, they have the Dragons cycle. So, of course, Kakusho, of course, very popular, powerful card that everyone knows about. All the dragons, all the legendary dragons, did things when they died. And Kakusho drained your opponent for 5 and you gained 5. Very sweet. The green one basically sucked. I guess it's playable in Commander, but not very good. Obviously, Champions was based around Legends. The first set that was really based around Legends, and like having, if you were a Legend, this is great. You know, you could have synergy with other cards in the deck, so that was kind of sweet. But Champions was a huge power down from Mirrodin. I mean, a big one. So think like say Masques from Urza's block, except instead of like, you know, things like Rishadenport and Rising Waters, we just have really big expensive legends that ask you to invest a lot in them. So that kind of stuff. The mechanics were not very good. They were spliced onto Arcane and Soul Shift, which weren't that great, and didn't really work very well. Bushido, which was okay at best, and the flip cards, which some were great and a lot were not that great. Ninjas, of course, and Betrayers was really fun. It was a really great fun card in Block. It was really, or I should say, creature type and mechanic and Block. It was really fun to play with and constructed too. Ninjas are still kind of a powerhouse in a lot of older formats that they're legal, so very fun there. And there are, of course, lots of actually singularly powerful cards from this block. Gifts, Top, Jite, Pied Angel, Sakura Tribe Elder, Heartbeat of Spring, Lava Spike, Winds of Nature, etc., etc. Yeah, the draft actually for the format was really, really sweet and really, really fun. I loved draft for Champions Block, even though Saviors didn't really offer much. Although, of course, the card that you see here on screen of Boro Envoy, this is one of the, yeah, it's probably one of the best cards in the set. This card was completely nuts. I know it looks really weird to you, especially if you haven't played the set. But yeah, a Boro Envoy was definitely completely busted in Champions block draft. I've seen this card go 14th and 15th pick. Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Not doesn't make a lot of sense. Doesn't make a lot of sense. But that's okay. That's okay. No big deal. No big deal. It's just I mean, there's not a lot of good to say about Saviors, except Piping Needle was a really good card, and Sweep was kind of an interesting mechanic in draft, but everywhere else, not so good. Not so good. All right, Rhaptica Block. This is the second sort of dedicated multicolor block, and this is, I mean, along with probably like Invasion, this is probably the best block of all time, because not only were things really, really powerful, but the power level was really flat among the different colors and archetypes and everything else. So it was incredible. And I still remember the Shocklands. I remember the reveal of the Shocklands on the Wizards site in like 2005, like early 2005. I mean, this was insane. I remember looking at this stuff and just being, well, shocked, I guess, for lack of a better word. I mean, these are basically just dual lands, and like the number of combinations and everything else, the power level of these cards has started to swirl in my head. I mean, it was incredible. I mean, just everything is just awesome. I mean, shock lands and fetch lands, of course, that came before them, and onslaught block, and of course afterwards, and Zendikar form the power level, the basis of a lot of different formats. Well, mostly just modern. Of course, there's also Commander as well. I mean, these cards are great. I mean, unbelievably powerful, unbelievably great. I mean, just incredible artwork. They just enable a lot of different things. Really, really good and really balanced. But yeah, there's, I mean, you can't, there's just a ton of value cards in this set. I mean, just everything was just so good. Everything was viable. I mean, just unbelievable. Unbelievable. First Ravnica Block is just absolutely keynote. And of course, it's no surprise, of course, that Richard Garfield worked on this set. Just like every other great set, Richard Garfield was basically there. The draft was really good and really fun. Like, I know people poo-poo about like the bounce lands and the signets. I mean, Ravnica Block was probably, well, maybe Champions before it, but Ravnica was really the first block that I see people evolved, like when they were drafting, like how they take certain cards, like over time, like things changed and stuff. People realized how good the bounce lands were. People realized how good the signets were, how easy it was to take different color cards, even multicolor cards. So yeah, I mean, definitely incredible, definitely really great. Of course, things like Ribbon of Night, which are awesome. Like, Ribbon of Night was expensive, but it was awesome. It gave you a ton of value for like 5 mana, which was just like, this is an amazing card in draft and constructed. It was good and constructed too, right? Not exactly the most 100% perfect for like constructed, right? Things like Dredge didn't exactly work out the way that really Wizards wanted them to, almost certainly. Yeah, Dredge. kind of a miss. That's kind of a miss, right? But you know, they probably didn't think about it with all these older cards, all these older graveyard-oriented cards from Odyssey Block and older. That probably wasn't on their mind. Dark Confidant, of course, from the original Ravnica, the invitational card of Bob Marr, and it was, I mean, what can you say of Dark Confidant? One of the best creatures of all time, probably the best black creature of all time. And the Ravnica formats with in Standard with Ravnica are just the best ever. I mean, you can't. I mean, it's just incredible. All right, Time Spiral. So, what's good about Time Spiral? Well, I mean, I'm gonna say everything. Not a good format for beginners, but it was a really fun format. Split Second is a really sweet mechanic. I think these kind of things were like, I always do this thing all the time, regardless of what you say. I think these are cool mechanics and like a little, like a smaller doses, right? I mean, there's a ton of returning mechanics, which is really cool, which I like. And I thought this was really fun because you can just do, well, all sorts of fun things in Standard. And of course, there was the reprints of the old border cards and the time shifted sheet, like the 121 cards were printed into Standard, and of course, subsequently into Modern too, many years later. And the draft, I thought the draft was really good, with the minus of Sprout Swarm, which was, you know, some issues there. I remember playing Sprout Swarm in draft and just like casting it like twice a turn and just like beating whatever my opponent did. Like I would just grow my board and it would just be completely totally deterministic. Not super fun. Sprout Swarm, definitely one of the worst cards in draft ever of all time. I mean, mostly because it was a common, but I mean just the gameplay of it was not good either. All right, so now we have Lorwyn. What's important about Lorwyn? We get a change in the block structure. We get 2 and then 2 instead of 3. So, but this, of course, was only temporary. It's another tribal block. And then, of course, we get some multicolored stuff, like hybrid and stuff, too. Tribal, this time we get race, class stuff. That's all over the place. Limited is pretty fun, but extremely complex. A lot of onboard complexity, which is a problem. Unfortunately, this starts an issue with fairies being too good. Fairies are too good, right? And sort of constructed right in Standard. And then, of course, this causes problems down for the next 5 or 6 years. Not so good. Not so good. And of course, a lot of creature power creep, whether for better or for worse. Shards of Alara. Sort of the first multicolor block since Ravnica. I mean, there was multicolor hybrid stuff in Lorwyn Shadowmoor block, but not really specifically. Again, Jund is the response to fairies, and the Jund deck was supposed to beat up on fairies, but I mean, I don't know. I mean, this is just another problem that's going to only to continue to grow. More power creep, Wild Nikotl, Bloodbraid Elf, and so on. But this Alara was a great set. All of the shards were great. A lot of the lore was great. Everything else about it was sweet. Trial lands. Sweet. These are really powerful lands that are basically just better than the lands from Invasion Block, right? The tap lands. These cards are awesome. And then, of course, we get to stuff like the ultimatums, the planeswalkers, which were fairly balanced, the charms, things like Neither Reliquary, so singular powerful cards, really great stuff. Colored artifacts kind of make their debut here, even though there's one, a mirror, Sarcomite Mirror, and Future Sight. But really, colored artifacts in Esper make their debut here, which is a very important part later on. And all the shards are pretty interesting. I mean, a great block outside of the power creep stuff. I mean, absolutely just great, just incredible. Now we get to Zendikar. What's the first thing you think about Zendikar? Enemy Fetch lands. That's right. People loved enemy fetch lands, went totally nuts. During their pre-release season, like they revealed enemy fetch lands, people went insane. Stuff like Goblin Guide, really powerful, aggressive cards in here. Goblin Guide, which is basically the best, most aggressive, most powerful red 1-drop in the game. I mean, it gives you random information about what your opponent's playing. It gives you 2 extra damage. I mean, this thing is just insane. Of course, more power creep, because why not? Because that's how this stuff works. Lots of really cool stuff. So landfall is an incredible mechanic, traps are an incredible mechanic, and multi-kicker is a pretty good mechanic. Jace, Stoneforge Mystic, pretty ridiculous power creep on especially Jace in regards to Planeswalkers. And of course, Zendikar Draft is remembered as being completely ridiculously fast. I mean, absolutely insanely fast. Like, to say, yeah, I mean, this is probably the fastest draft format. I mean, might have been like the was it M12 or M13 were pretty fast too, but Zendikar was completely nuts on the speed of the format with stuff like step links and so on. Not really well liked. Not really well liked. So yeah. Of course, I don't want to forget Rise of the Eldrazi, which had a slower format, but yeah, which of course introduced the Eldrazi and all this other stuff. Of course, but yeah. So, anyways, let's go to Scar's Block. Of course, we have Phyrexia's back. We have the Mirrans versus the Phyrexian storyline, which is pretty cool. We have the return of Karn, right? Basically, he's been more or less absent for quite a while. And then, of course, we have Caw-Blade, which is at the end of this oops, we fucked up kind of storyline of creature. So, yeah, fairies to Jund to Caw-Blade, and Caw-Blade wasn't even, I mean, the deck wasn't even good because it just got trashed on by Jund, but when, you know, Jund rotated out with, like, when shards went away, then, of course, all the cards are ridiculous and everything goes to crap. And of course, we have our first standard bannings of Jason Stoneforge Mystic in the first time since 2005. Not a good thing. And of course, there's all sorts of other problems. Phyrexian mana is not very balanced. Misstep and Gitaxian Probe are problems in basically every format except standard or block. Oopsie daisy. Phyrexian mana stuff sees a lot of play, including today things like Dismember, right, is a popular one. So yeah, oopsie daisy, we screwed up again. All right, so we have Innistrad. This is one of the most insanely influential blocks of all time. This is, think about Modern Horizons or War of the Spark or something today. That's what Innistrad was in 2011, fall of 2011. Still the basis of a lot of different decks in Modern, Legacy, and Vintage. Things like Snapcaster and the Miracles mechanic and Gristlebrand and so on and so forth, and Delver and da-da-da-da-da, all this stupid crap. Unfortunately, we see the continuation of Graveyard as a second hand, where like they just use the graveyard, but it's not worth to hate them out on the graveyard. So things like Crypt have really reduced usefulness. Very unfortunate, very unfortunate. That's not a good thing. A huge impact upon release on all formats. Extremely popular, extremely powerful. All the horror tropes and stuff, like this is, I think, really the first modern top-down design of like, we're going to come up with this idea and then design a block around it. So in this case, it was horror tropes, whether classic or present or whatever. The draft is incredible, one of the best draft formats of all time. Avasturn Restored, though, sucks as a draft format. Of course, obviously I mentioned Miracles, which is completely busted in older formats, mostly just Legacy. And of course, they introduced double face cards, which I have a love-hate relationship with. So there you go. Okay, so now we are at postmodern, sort of. Yeah, so now we get into a lot of the current problems with the game that are still afflicting us, everything from, I'd say, about 2012 to present. There are a lot of issues going back to cons and BFZ standard. A lot of bans, way too many bans, a lot of mistakes. The fire sort of philosophy, of course, causing a ton of issues. Cards that just do everything with no downside and no cost to doing those things. Ramp becoming out of control too many times to count. Interaction just not being that great, although interaction itself isn't bad. It's mostly that the interaction is doesn't line up well against the threats that always replace themselves. There's a ton of commander stuff from about 2011 to present, which kind of exacerbate things because now they sort of make standard sets and sort of design standard sets with commander in mind, or trying to get more commanders and players into standard. Hello, companion. And there's a real lack of anything interesting. There's a lot of really dumb stuff, like really a lot of boring crap in comparison to what came before, certainly. Okay, Rathy Block 2, this is a pretty good limited format, minus the whole pack rat thing, but at least that was a rare. Shockland reprints, which was great, really good. Unfortunately, the set was extremely hyped. I was super excited for it, but it went over like a lead balloon, I would say, because, I mean, obviously, like, this has the sort of sequel problem. Look at, say, Jurassic Park 2, The Lost World, compared to Jurassic Park 1. Didn't exactly go over as well. Yeah, so unfortunately, I mean, that's just the nature of the beast, but it didn't work out very well. It didn't even come close. There were some good cards, of course, like Deathray Shaman and such. Like, that's, of course, clearly a very good card. The story was not that great, kind of meh, really derivative, really kind of boring, no hook, with the implicit maze and stuff. Who cares? And it didn't help that Dragon's Maze was like a garbage set, like really bad, really bad. And of course the standard was just like 3 decks. It was not interesting, and it sucked too. There's just so much to not like about it. Such a huge letdown. So yeah, very sad. Alright, so Cadaverous Block, the enchantment block. And of course, this has a different problem than something like Rhaptica, which is the enchantment problem. For example, how do we make a block based around enchantments where it's interesting and fun and powerful, but not uninteractive? Because only at this time, green and white could really interact. Of course, there was a null and blue, but that's a sideboard card. How could these other colors really deal with enchantments, right? Especially like black couldn't do anything. This is, of course, why we have the reprint of Thoughtseize in Cadaverous Block. But even still, this causes issues because you have these two poles, right? You have like, you can't do anything and I just do my thing and like screw you. And the other is like, I play a bunch of creature enchantments on a creature and then I attack you, and then, oh, you play a kill spell and I like lose like 3 or 4 cards. So it just, it doesn't really work because enchantments at this time were so difficult to answer and deal with that, I mean, it's basically an impossible problem. The enchantment creature stuff, which is cool, didn't actually really work out very well, unfortunately. But the gods, all the gods are really cool. This is really sweet and fun for Commander. So that was sweet. The temples were pretty interesting, the dual lands. But the set did feel a bit underpowered. Born of the Gods kind of sucked. But the Theros Con standard was actually pretty good. So that's nice. Alright, so Cons BFZ. Here's where we get some problems. Cons also ironically, although not like this isn't some sort of omen or whatever, all of, say, uh, uh, for example, all block constructed ends here, which is fine because block constructed is a not that great of a format typically, but it also ends here. But of course, it just sort of coincides with these problems. I didn't really like BFZ or Shadows Standard. I mean, there was all sorts of problems and bans. I mean, just BFZ and Oath and Shadows and I don't know. Like Cons was a good set. It had fetch lands, which is sweet, but like there's just too many problems. And of course, not even talk about the Dell stuff in older formats, which is not very good. I mean, and then Oath, like, what was even going on in Oath? Like, I have no idea what was like with like the Void and like the stupid colorless stuff and the exile into your graveyard. I mean, just everything was just like, what the hell is going on? I don't know. The mana bases were too good, of course, which is a recurring problem, I would say. This is also kind of the beginning of the two-set blocks, which, you know, whatever. Fuck this shit. Alright, Shadows over Innistrad. So it's another return set that sucks and doesn't do justice, right, to the original set, just like the original. It's like the return to Zendikar wasn't very good. It was a boring story. Everyone knew it was the Eldrazi, or had a pretty good idea. Wow, this looks like Eldrazi stuff. The art's been getting pretty shitty since Rhaptica Block, so that's fun. Standard rotation is just changing randomly, who knows. And more Eldrazi double face card stuff. I mean, no one really cares. It's not the same as the original Innistrad. Zendikar has nothing in common with the other Zendikar. It just sucks. It's just boring. It's just a complete letdown on all fronts. Maybe it's not even like, it's not garbage, but it's like they're just fucking up for just so many different ways. It's very unfortunate. Alright, so now we have Kaladesh Block. Okay, so it's another artifact block, and surprise, surprise, of course, there are a bunch of bannings. Well, there's a lot of weird stuff going on. For example, just like the original Mirrodin, we have a new artifact subtype in vehicles. So this is a pretty powerful kind of thing. They've seen some amount of play, but certainly the Copter, of course, a little too good, and did get banned. Got pushed a little too hard. They tried to make, for example, like an original Mirrodin with things like cranial plating, and of course, especially things like Skull Clamp, or even the original swords. These were very strong cards, and certainly Skull Clamp was completely broken. So we get a little bit of that here, very unfortunate. We also get energy, which is just a little bit too strong, a little bit too over the line, where it just does a lot. It's just kind of sort of tacked on the cards, so it's not really costed appropriately. It's just a little bit too good. And of course, there's a mechanic called Revolt. The best of those, of course, would be Fatal Push. Really good 1-mana black removal spell. Revolt's a pretty interesting mechanic, although it's very easy to enable in certain formats, like well, anything with fetch lands, obviously. So pretty interesting stuff here. I liked the energy quite a bit. I think it was a good mechanic. I don't think there was anything really super broken about it. Even the deck, which, you know, did get the cards banned, it was just a little bit over the line, a little bit better than what was going on, and there was no real counterplay to it. There were no hate cards to it, which is very unfortunate. Definitely an oversight there. All right, Amonkhet Block. I think this was a really sweet block. Obviously, really digging the ancient Egyptian theme. The story was actually pretty cool, pretty interesting. I liked it a lot. There was obviously some really powerful cards again. Stuff like Ramonap Ruins getting banned, but obviously Glorybringer and Hazaret are big parts of the mono red deck at the time. Very strong stuff. I'd say the power level was actually pretty good, maybe a little bit low, but I thought it was actually pretty strong. I think there was certainly some outliers like Scarab God, which is just like, really pushing up the power level of the sort of the set as a whole, just kind of an outlier. Embalm and Eternalize are kind of interesting mechanics. Again, I really like Exert. I think this is a really interesting mechanic. This is awesome. It's again another combat themed one. Really interesting. A lot of stuff going on here. I mean, obviously, Glorybringer is just one of those like 5-mana dragons they print in standard. Just like that's just awesome. Just like completely awesome. Just like really really strong. I think these cards are great because these 5-mana dragons tend to be pretty balanced, right? Because they can do all these things, but again, they are 5 mana, and B, they are red. So like it sort of limits a little bit how busted they can be. But Exert's really good. Glorybringer, I mean, one of the all-time greats. You know, you thought Flametongue Kabu was good. This guy's going nuts. More god cards, of course. Those are interesting. Those are pretty cool. New take on the gods, which is pretty cool. I like those a lot. And of course, there's pyramids and stuff. None of those cards were very good, unfortunately, but you know, maybe when we return to Amonkhet, we can have a story about a really super awesome, mega great pyramid, even of some sort. And it's all mysterious and everything revolves around. I mean, that would be sweet. That would be super cool. You know, it's hidden in the desert and it's been buried in sand, sort of like, you know, how the Sphinx, Great Sphinx was buried in sand, and then of course it was actually unearthed multiple times throughout its life cycle. But I don't really want to get into that too much. That's another thing entirely. But there are things like White Zombies, which fit in perfectly, right, with the story. Really made a lot of cool stuff. Um, the Gatewatch stuff is like okay here. It was fine. Normally it's really bad and annoying, but it was okay here. But I really like this set, even though there were a little bit of issues, but I thought it was great. All right, Ixalan. This block was certainly a little bit weaker, unfortunately. A lot of the stuff, the key stuff, a lot of the tribal stuff, not that great. I mean, it wasn't bad, but it was definitely like not even really that good for standard. Things like the dinosaur decks were they just didn't have enough enablers. Everything's a little bit too expensive. You know, especially all the really powerful cards like Gishath were 1,000,000 mana, right? So that's not reasonable in most standards. The tribal stuff, like I said, it just wasn't. The vampires was, you know, there's some okay stuff there, and the merfolk and stuff, like, not bad. Obviously, Carnage Tyrant was very good, very powerful card against control decks. And the Explorer mechanic was actually really good. I think there was a lot here that was really great. I liked the two-set block. I liked it. Really helped tell a great cohesive story. The aesthetic was really cool. This is definitely one of the more interesting worlds, even though it's kind of like pulls a lot from real world stuff. It's not very derivative, right? Like we didn't have vampires come over to fight Dino Riders, right, in our history, right? Like obviously that didn't happen, but it was really cool. I really liked. I mean, yeah, just everything about the set was really cool, even though the maybe everything just hit a little bit too low, you know. I really liked Enrage. I think that's a really interesting mechanic. I think that's perfect for like the dinosaur tribe, right? If that's emblematic of them, what makes dinosaurs different than dragons, right? Are they just dragons without wings? But having this sort of Enrage mechanic is really interesting. There was some really cool stuff there. A lot of it was too expensive. Stuff like Ripjaw Raptor was pretty sweet, but yeah. And of course, pirates. Pirates were really sweet. There was obviously, you know, a lot of good pirates. Really cool stuff there. Some that's even seen play, like the Goblin Pirate or the Kitesail Freebooter guy. Lots of cool stuff. Definitely a fun tribe, and EDH was really sweet. But again, not quite really there is like a full sort of tribal deck. I mean, again, everything's just shooting a little bit below par, but really cool block. I think there's a lot going on here that is really cool. I think even the story is actually really great with like Jace and Vraska and pirates and Angrath. Angrath definitely really interesting, super cool character. All right, now we have Dominaria. So this is sweet. Like, I mean, you can't go wrong with Dominaria. This is definitely one of I think this is the best block they've released in the last like 5+ years. Power level was good, really strong, but not, you know, overbearing, right? Really great story. I mean, obviously they have a bunch of these characters left over from the beginning of the game, for example, like Teferi, and some other characters like Joyra, Karn, of course, too, that have been left over that are interesting, that have interesting stories from back in the day, so like stuff that actually already works and we already have interesting characters and not like these new characters that no one cares about that aren't interesting that are wrote poorly. So, they kind of lucked out here a little bit. I like the historic keyword. That was really cool. Again, really figuring out how to do the legendary stuff. I like the legendary uncommon stuff here. I thought that was really interesting. Uh, Really annoying though to have that in every single set since then. I'm pretty sure every single set had these stupid legendaries like just jamming all this commander stuff in. It's like, please just stop. Richard Garfield, of course, worked on this set, probably why it was so good. I mean, just he does obviously really great designs. I mean, basically everything he works on is like either really good, really strong, or just really resonant, really awesome, flavorful kind of set. So yeah, you can't go wrong with that. And of course, brings back Kicker again, a great mechanic, and it introduces Saga, probably the best thing that's been introduced in the last 20 years is sagas. Sagas are just awesome. Even Urza's Saga, right? I think this is a really interesting, well, I don't want to say spell. It's not a spell, it's a land. But the Saga mechanic in general, best thing to hit Magic in the last 20 years. Definitely not really problematic. It's a lot easier to control the power level and how these things play out versus something like Planeswalkers where it's like, just the tuning has to be so perfect. You have to thread the needle. It's like, well, if it's not good enough, it's garbage, and if it's a little too good, it's just overpowering. So it's like it's really hard to get those right. And of course, I really like the sort of past being a big part of the set, or maybe even Dominaria being the set about the past or whatever. I think that's awesome. I think that's really cool. All right, so let's just put a bunch of this other crap together. Ravnica, War of the Spark, M20, Eldraine, Theros, M21, Zedgar, Kaldheim, Strixhaven, AFR, blah 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 blah. Modern Horizons. I mean, all this stuff. It's what is it? It's fire design and it sucks. It's funny because it's horrible. I don't even know what they were thinking. Like you just look at the cards and like, yeah, this is ridiculous. Um, it seems like again everything is going to be okay. I mean, hopefully I'm not speaking too soon. Of course, there's definitely could be issues right with new Innistrad set. Who knows? But double dose at Innistrad. Hopefully everything goes over well with that. But I don't know. It looks like since Kaldheim, it looks like things are being powered down, but there's still a lot of annoying stuff going on, unfortunately. All right. So there's a lot of problems. So there's a lot of cards that are just too difficult to interact with, or it's unprofitable to interact with. Think like something like Omnath, or even something just like Elder Gargaroth. Like if you let it attack and or block once or twice, I mean you're so far behind. It's like even if you're trading up in tempo, you just get buried in cards like cards that basically say answer me immediately or you lose, and also if you answer me anyways, like you're still down. Like that's not really good design. I mean these are pretty stupid cards. I mean again they're just making a lot of the same mistakes. Free spells, mana ramp with no downside, cards that have text boxes a mile long, cards that invalidate text boxes, so things like Oko, um, and just a lot of basic stupid design stuff that is just like, what were they even thinking? A lot of face cards that are too pushed, right? Again, Oko here, right? Of course, Emrakul, Promised End is another one, right? So cards that are just pushed too much and of course end up getting banned. So it's like, why are you not testing these cards? You're obviously pushing. What exactly is going on here? There's just too much free stuff. Like again, all the landfall stuff. Again, this is kind of an Omnath thing, but yeah, that was just Omnath having like triple landfall. I mean, just what? Yeah, everything basically replaces itself. that's in cards or mana or something. And then of course Planeswalkers with the static abilities feel like they do 100 different things all at the same time and are potentially too good. I don't think stack abilities are bad on Planeswalkers. I think it's interesting, gives them a little bit more playability, but the ones we got in War of the Spark didn't feel very good to play with, or at least some of them didn't. All right. Yeah, I don't know what was happening for like the last 2 years. Like this is it's one thing to like make an artifact set and it's broken, right? Like again, we expect that for the most part. Although typically now there's, because of colored artifacts, that's somewhat mitigated, somewhat solved. Or just stuff like with Jace and or Stoneforge, which was kind of this long, like cascading effect of like everything since fairies, and trying to like get everything into balance, which is just yeah. Green and blue are of course getting way too much stuff. Green just can obviously just do anything apparently. I'm not really sure how that works. And of course the free spells like Wilderness Reclamation, things like Fires of Invention, like how did they not think these cards would not be broken, right? This is just a personal thing. Actually, I'm really annoyed by the signpost stuff. Like, I think some of that stuff is okay all the time, but it feels like really derivative and formulaic in every single draft format. It's just like signposts mechanics. Just these 10 different uncommon cards of each 2-color pair, and you draft them, and they tell you how to draft. Like, cool, yay. Also, the mana, for some reason, is just like absurdly easy to assemble. Like they don't really have. I'm not sure what the deal is. Why they thought like. I mean, I think triomes are like kind of okay, but even still, with like all the different rare dual lands that they keep printing, it's like this is just. I mean, mana is kind of. It's not perfect, but it's getting to the point where it's like it kind of doesn't matter. And of course, unfortunately, with organized play, like being a complete, well, shit show for lack of a better word, unfortunately, yeah, that doesn't even make any sense. We don't even know where organized play is going to be. And then, of course, they keep changing it, like the Mythic Invitational, the Mythic Tour, Players Tour. Now we have set boosters, draft boosters, collectors boosters. Like even on stream when they're talking about like Modern Horizons 2 and what cards would be in there, like they didn't know. They didn't know what like cards would be in each it's just all these different artworks and things. You can't keep track of anything. Everything's so needlessly complex. Of course, it also does this with cards. We'll just have infinity text. Like in Kaldheim, there'll be like a pile of text on one card, and then on the back, it's another card with also a pile of text. It's like, how is anyone supposed to keep track of all this stuff? I mean, they kind of lucked out with like the pandemic, because like I can't even imagine trying to play all these stupid flip cards all the time in like regular Magic, like in paper. Like that sounds horrendous. Like I don't even already like playing like flip cards like just in regular Magic, and there's not that many, right? Now it's like every set has like a million of them. That was the thing for this year. But the one nice thing about this power creep, at least in some formats like Legacy, for example, things like Questing Beast and Plague Engineer have really tamped down on the power of things like True Name Nemesis, right? Which is pretty sweet, which is nice. I mean, again, I'm not happy exactly that Questing Beast is a card. Like, I still probably couldn't name all the different abilities on it, but it has this damage prevention thing. So it prevents damage prevention. So it also works against Maze of Ith as well as things like Glacial Chasm too. So definitely kind of a wonky thing going on there, but yeah, so I guess that's nice, right? True Name was a pretty dumb, brainless card, so seeing it taken down like 3 or 4 pegs is kind of sweet. Yeah. Also, the rolling dice stuff, yeah, missed me with that. I'm not a huge fan. Like, I guess some amount of it, but a whole set of it, No thanks. All right. So the Justice League stuff is pretty bad. They keep having different writers write this thing, and so like sometimes it's kind of good and interesting, like again during Ixalan, where you have an interesting story, but then like they change characters up all the time, and it's just like or excuse me, not change characters, but they change writers, authors all the time. So I don't know what's going on there. Obviously, the ending of War of the Spark was a disaster. That was just extremely confusing. The stuff with like Niv-Mizzet dying and then being resurrected was like not like it was just really confusing, and they screwed that up. Yeah, it's just complete mess. Really, really bad. Or even for example, this isn't even a recent thing, but like the death of the Eldrazi, where they're like, I'm just channeling all the mana from the ley lines on Zendikar to kill these two like Eldrazi Titans. Like, does that hurt the character? Does that hurt Chandra? Does that hurt the plane? Right? You would think like this is kind of a trope. Like if you do something like this, there's big consequences, really big consequences for the person. They like burn out or something like that. You know, like this is kind of a fantasy thing. Like you can't just like channel all this mana willy-nilly and expect to get away with it. That's not how this works. I mean, like, how do you even just I'm just gonna burn the Eldrazi? Like, this is so stupid. Like, it was really dumb. This is extremely dumb. One nice thing though, I really like the Sorin versus Nahiri stuff, like their ongoing feud. I think that's cute. I think that's funny. I think it's pretty interesting, right? Because they're just being completely unreasonable, and it's like this is what happens when you have thousand of year old people that just hate each other and do stuff. I don't know. I like Sora, and I like Nahiri too. So that's a really interesting sort of dynamic where they just want to kill each other. That's kind of cool. Um, I like the new Weatherlight through. I think that's actually pretty cool. So I'm excited to go back to that now, next year or so. Karn going to nuke Phyrexia with the Silix, which is interesting. We'll see how that works out. Maybe there's something with the Brothers War going on too, right? In the past and future sets and stuff. So we'll see what's going on there. All right. Wow. I don't know even where to go with the art. Like a lot of it's very generic CGI stuff. A lot of it's pretty bad. Obviously stuff like Rushblade Commander is like some of the worst crap I've ever seen. Looks like something from a mobile game. Yikes. But there's a lot of new art treatments, for example, like in Eldraine, like the storybook cards or whatever, and some of the different art treatments, like the ones in Kaldheim are really sweet. So there's like a lot of interesting stuff, but like a lot of just their like generic regular art for their normal cards is like a lot of it just looks really bad. I mean, I don't know, like it just looks like someone like spent like 2 hours in Photoshop or something. Pretty annoying. Um, I mean, I like some of the different variants, but like all the millions and billions of different variants all the time is like a little overwhelming. I don't even know all of what's out there. Um, Honestly, like a lot of the stuff is like the some of the dog and cat stuff is kind of obnoxious. Like I don't really like that. And there's like a lot of secret layers too that are pretty bad with like the like the slime one and all like the tattoo one, which is like super trashy. Like these things are ugly, like really bad. And now like the Fortnite stuff, I mean, just ugh, it's gonna be horrible. The cards don't even look good. The art style isn't even good at all. Like yeah, I can't wait for the Rick and Morty secret lair. Oh boy, here we go. All right. Um, yeah. So yeah, the design of everything is just bad. Like it's not because of Arena. It's not because of pro designers. For example, they've been around for at least 20 years, at least since Invasion Blockish when that was being designed. Just the design is just obviously bad. Like I don't even know like how you even look at these cards and think, yep, that's fine. These are all fine. So that's really weird. I don't know. Like I mean, it's not like in fact we even have less information. Everything's still getting broken, so it's not like things are getting solved. Like we don't even have full information, but this hasn't been a problem in the past. This is certainly something's going on, but again, hopefully it looks like they've dialed it back in the last 6 months or so. So we'll have to see. Um, Yeah, also the complexity in like word text, again, I already mentioned that, is on the MDFCs, like the multi double face cards, the modal double face cards, excuse me. That's really annoying. I couldn't even tell you what half these things do. Like that Tegrid chick, like the one that's, the black one, I couldn't tell you what she does. She's super popular in like Commander and stuff. I couldn't tell you what she does. All of her text, I have no idea. I have no idea. I mean, I paid a lot of attention, probably too much attention to this game, and I can't even tell you what half these cards do. Like, they're just a lot of words, a lot of text, and it's like, I'm used to, like, you're used to these kind of cards, or cards being bad, the warp worlds of the world, but yeah, yeah, not just, I mean, hopefully, like, again, hopefully it's a clean slate, new fresh start. Eldraine's rotating out, right? This fall, and hopefully we can get rid of this crap and go back to like some sort of reasonable semblance of design, even if it's like I don't particularly like the way that they are designing stuff these days. Yeah, oh right, yeah, immersion, right. Like I mentioned that with the dogs and cat things, that's like really stupid. I mean, like again, stuff like having Wild Mongrel and Jackal Pup like is not a problem. Like having cats like Wild Nicodle or whatever, again, not a problem. But like, ha ha ha, it's my kitty Reno catty poo. I mean, just this is stupid. Like again, it was fine in Amonkhet, right? Because this is perfect, right? Because this is fits like the flavor of like Egypt, right? Where cats were certainly very well respected. So like that kind of stuff, again, that's fine there, right? Having these sort of house cat kind of things around caracals or whatever, like that's again not a big deal. But having like this like, oh, it's my pet pupperino, and oh, he's got a silly making a silly. I mean, just this just it just takes me out. I'm just like, this is so bad. Um, yeah, not even talking about the stupid stuff with Strixhaven with like the math is magic stuff and the theater kids for like Prismari and Rubik's cubes. Like, oh yeah, Rubik's cubes. They have Rubik's cubes in Magic. Apparently, that's canon. Counting every digit of pi backwards. I don't even. Do, really, really, really. This is written by a midwit that thinks they're intelligent. I mean, this is stuff that's just unbelievably bad. Like this is so bad. Like people. I mean, this is like when you see someone that's not very smart try to write smart people, smart characters. It comes out like this, and it's just embarrassing. Like absolutely embarrassing. Like who even thought this was? Oh my gosh! Just please stop. And the side cuts, like literally on every single plane, everyone has the stupid side cuts. Like please stop. Like this is, I mean, this is horrendous. Like it's one thing for like one or two characters or something to have it, but like every single character, I mean, this is just horrible. Like A, again, immersion breaking, and B, it looks stupid. It looks stupid. I mean, just stop. There's obviously all the crossover stuff. I don't even know to where to begin with that. The Kaldheim metal stuff was like cringy. I like metal, and this is just like, just stop. Like, bro, you're like 30 years too late. Like, were you talking about like black metal from the early 90s or something? Like Mayhem and Venom and stuff or whatever? Like, just, oh boy. Just unbelievably stupid. I mean, yeah, okay, Boomer. Real nice. Yargle's Secret Lairs. Wow, yeah, that's real funny. Wow, haha, wow, look at this stupid joke. At least AFR was okay. Like I don't mind the D&D stuff. I think that's the only exception, just because they obviously Magic shares like so much of its DNA, so to speak, with D&D, and as well as the company owns it, so there's no problem with reprinting those cards and things like that. Like it's not like crossover, so to speak, from completely different IPs from a different company, which would certainly be obnoxious. But 2022 looks pretty good. We got new Kamigawa again. some sort of cyberpunk Kamigawa. I mean, we'll see how that works. Oh boy, again, expect side cuts, expect derivative cyberpunk stuff, but hopefully we'll see some really good, nice Kamigawa stuff. There's a new place with demon mobsters and stuff, and cities built by angels. I mean, that's a cool concept. It's, you know, a real Art Deco looking place. I think it was like Capybara or something. Capybara Alley. I don't know. And then, of course, going back to Dominaria, I think it's called Dominaria United. Again, you won't get any complaint from me. I mean, you got so much good lore there already built up. It's going to be hard to screw that up. And, of course, Brothers War, going back in time, another time-traveling thing, back to the Brothers War stuff. So that's great. And, of course, lots of good supplemental stuff like Jumpstart, which I liked quite a bit, as well as Double Masters. Again, while I'm definitely fatigued from all these product releases, just the nature of the game just getting bigger, printing more and more stuff. Like, I mean, obviously the stuff from Modern Horizons 2 needs to be reprinted, things like Ragavan and so on that are obviously just crazy expensive. These kind of things need to be reprinted too. So yeah, Double Masters is good. Actually, Ragavan's a pretty interesting card because it's like, how many more times are they going to have to reprint like Kiki Jiki as the mythic for red? But yeah, I'm again, they at least understand, like, with how reprints have to go. They just can't do one reprint set every couple years or every other year. That won't really work. So yeah, that's fine though. That's fine. Lots of good stuff like that. So 2022 actually looking pretty good. And that's basically it. I don't got much else to say. I mean, that's the long and the short of it. That is a brief history of Magic the Gathering, coming in at almost 2 hours. Oh boy. Yeah, really a lot of interesting stuff going on. There's so much to touch on, and I really tried to abbreviate everything as much as possible. But yeah, there's really cool stuff. Really interesting to see how the game has evolved, right, for better or worse over the years. And in a lot of ways, it's been better. Fortunately, the core of the game is so good, like, you know, that unless they change some of those things radically, like deck size or like the mana system, things like that, you know, you can't really screw it up too much. You know, you can ban a couple of the outlier cards that cause problems, and then everything's okie dokie. But yeah, so that's it. That's it. So thanks for stopping by. I hope you enjoyed this. If you're still here, incredible. I can't believe you watched me talk about this stuff for 2 hours-ish almost. So yeah, that's it. So thanks for stopping by, and have a great day.